and tingling railway sleepers, sleepy houses lying for square and fret. Orange beams divide the darkness, rumbling fit to ten in the waking word.
All right, and here we are back for episode number 2 of the Broadsword file. I had to think what the name of the show was for a second. The definitive Jethro Tull podcast. At least that's what we're saying now. Maybe you'll say something different. But we thank you for tuning in or viewing in. And tonight, or today, or at this moment, whenever you're watching, it's time for Stand Up and Jethro Tull's second album. So one of the things going on would be the departure of Mick Abrahams, who apparently did not want to play more than a couple nights a week and didn't really want to travel out of the country. Going to America was not in his list of things to do.
Right. Wasn't on his to-do list.
No, not at all. So it seems, it must have been looking inevitable that he wasn't going to be with them forever.
Right, because I'm sure Ian was looking to expand to America.
Yeah. And probably, I think he probably would never have felt satisfied in that setting, because he would always feel like he was being pressured to push himself maybe with stuff that's out of his wheelhouse.
Right.
I mean, I'm kind of putting words in his mouth. I don't know exactly. But from the interviews and the things I've read, I think he was much happier overall once he did his own thing with Blood of a Pig. Obviously, he didn't have the same level of success necessarily.
Right, but more, maybe it was something he felt more comfortable playing.
I think he was probably much more satisfied with his output.
Right.
Yeah. So then along comes Martin Barre after having Tony Iommi for a couple of weeks. And Tony Iommi, I remember him saying that he didn't think he really fit in with the boys. But he learned a lot from them as far as professionalism in the studio and stuff like that. They would get more done before noon than most bands aren't even in the studio.
Right.
They're getting up at like 10 o'clock in the morning. Yeah.
All depended on what was going on at the time.
The Tull has always been very studious in the studio. There it is. That's the back. That's the gatefold, the open cover right there. What do you think of the album cover? It's a wood cutting.
It's different.
Isn't it different?
It's different, yeah.
It's definitely, it's very 60s, I think.
Right, but in a very English sort of way.
Yeah.
Rustic.
Rustic, yeah, that's a good word, yeah. I like it. I think it's pretty cool. And it's kind of funny. It's almost like a caricature in some ways a little bit. Right. But not a real goofy character.
Folk art.
Yeah, folk art. And it's something different. Jimmy Grashow is the guy who did it, a New York woodcutter artist. And so anyway, moving into the meat of stand-up, as it were, what do you think of Martin's first foray on the studio? I hear he was very nervous, as you might imagine.
Well, he sounded like he kind of blended to me. It didn't sound like he was the new guy on the block.
I think so too. I think if you look at some of those early videos, there is a video, "To Be Sad is a Mad Way to Be," and you can see him paying close attention to what he's doing. He's obviously not staring around the room. He's paying close attention, but he sounds good and his timing looks good. And you don't see the drummer looking at him as if to say, pick up the pace. Which you will see sometimes, a drummer kind of looking at somebody as if to say, you're losing it.
Let's go.
And of course he was new, and he just as soon as he joined the band, pretty much he ran off with them to Sweden or somewhere, and they opened up for Jimi Hendrix.
Oh wow!
And Hendrix, they never really hung out with Hendrix.
Played with Hendrix?
Yeah, they opened up for him. I mean, they just met him, briefly. But Ian said Hendrix was a nice guy. Had some nice things to say about them and their music and stuff. And they met up him again at the Isle of Wight Festival. I think that was about a year, maybe a year and a half later. We'll talk about that for the benefit. So Martin in the studio, and the first song really right away makes it clear that blues is still there, but not exactly the way you thought it would be.
Right.
You
Yeah.
know?
It's not your dad.
It's not
your dad's blues.
Not at all. New Day Yesterday.
More power, just more fun.
It's got a lot of punch,
yeah.
And the timing, not that the timing was ever bad. They always had good timing. Even this was. The timing, I think, is very good.
They still had that kind of jazz flow,
But this stuff is tight.
And the bass and drums, once again, are very dominant.
You can say what you want about individual shows. Obviously, they're going to all be different, but they are very consistently tight. They always have been. But this album, especially the songs, and this being one of them, really shows that off, that timing off. You know,
right?
These songs aren't as loosely written as like the songs on This Was On. They have to be executed hard, fast, with just the right timing. Yeah, or it's going to sound junky. I'm thinking of like Nothing Is Easy as a great example of that. We'll get that. So New Day Yesterday is, in a lot of ways, bum 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 bum. It's a very standard blues tune, but if you notice, if you look at a typical 12-bar blues,
but then the drums, then you hear the drums come in.
Yeah,
bunker with the roll.
Yeah. It is. It's not your typical blues at all. It's very progressive in that respect. But if you notice, it doesn't come in on the first chord of the typical 12-bar blues. It comes in like the third. It starts on the third. Right. It's nothing too complicated. It's just a more original way of doing it. You know, it's still very much a bluesy tune, and the lyrics are very much in the vein of a typical blues song. My woman today, and you know, I gotta leave tomorrow. But you can hear in his hearing and in his singing. You can hear in his singing he's getting a little more confident. Glenn Cornnick is as good as ever on the bass.
Yeah, tremendous.
Matter of fact, like I was saying, I think this album really shows off how good their timing is. You can sense that from the previous album, that they're very comfortable with each other playing. You know.
Yeah. So whatever touring that they did, to support this sounds like it paid off.
Oh yeah, yeah. They had definitely rehearsed, and they play a lot. I think I would say that Ian, Mick, and Ian, Clive, and Glenn are very comfortable playing together. I think Mick was a little less comfortable with some of the stuff, but even he managed. I mean, he like rose to the occasion, and take as well as he could.
Like Mick was more
no criticism.
Standard, and these guys wanted to kind of be a little bit more progressive.
Yeah, you know, and he may have felt restricted by that because when he was going solo, if he's not really used to the chord structure that's going on, he's going to be restricted into soloing a little bit because he's going to have to think about where he's going next a little bit. And he's good enough to do that, you know. But, you know, it's not going to have the same feel as something where he's more relaxed doing it.
Right.
Whereas Martin was almost in a way like a blank slate. Although Martin also came along, Martin played saxophone and flute right off the bat, which must have been, attractive for Ian because he knew he could rely on Martin to help out with other things. And not only that, but Martin has that
sense of musical arrangement as well.
Yeah. Anytime when have you noticed that once you learn one instrument, when you start to learn another one, it really helps you learn about the first instrument too. Like you start to see why things are the way they are. You know, it gives you a new perspective on the old instrument, the way you used to do things. Okay. And I think that's one of the things that Ian liked about Martin was that Martin had a wider, broader perspective. Right. Not only in his guitar playing, but also in the fact that he could play other instruments and he
just had more of a musical spectrum.
Yeah, he did. And he was more of a blank slate than somebody like Tony Iommi, maybe. No offense to Tony Iommi. But I don't think Tony could do some of the stuff.
Tony Iommi went off to invent his own genre.
And it's good stuff. You know, so, no criticism intended. Yeah, another interesting thing about New Day Yesterday is later on when they started playing it, they played it in a decidedly unbluesy fashion. For instance, if you listen to Bursting Out, which is 78, Heavy Horses tour, mostly, I think, the song is played not like you hear it later on live in the 90s and 2000s, and not like you hear it on stand-up, but in a very much more rock and roll way. You know, the end of the 70s, I wouldn't say the blues was out of fashion, but it wasn't necessarily. It didn't have the niche it had later on with B.B. King.
Right. Well,
Fan Club.
you think the Blues Brothers for bringing a lot of those guys to
yeah,
the surface.
Probably could, yeah.
That were maybe more the blues. Was more maybe more underground.
Another song, and here's really the first of the
Jeffrey songs.
Yeah, the first of the Jeffrey songs, and the first of the more acoustic songs. Jeffrey goes to Leicester Square, and I used to wonder what the heck this instrument was when I was a kid. Until I got a chance. Well, there's tablas, yeah. I thought they were bongos. I didn't wonder what those were. I assumed they were bongos. But the string instrument he plays here is a balalaika, which is a 3-string Russian folk instrument. It's a real twangy thing, shaped like a triangle. I've ever seen one. And back in the day, they were kind of hard to get a hold of, like a decent one, unless you got one from like an Eastern European.
There was a band called Gorky Park that had guitar.
That's interesting.
Yeah,
it's an interesting
80s.
sound.
Yeah.
If you've never heard, for folks who've never heard one, you can just Google balalaika on YouTube or something. You can find it. It sounds a little bit like a mandolin. It's tuned differently. It's only got 3 strings, and I think one of them might be a drone. So it's almost like a dulcimer in some ways. It's the first of one of those observational songs. Instead of being him talking to a girl or somebody, it's him describing Jeffrey having an encounter
situation.
And it's kind of
tongue in cheek. Narrative.
Yeah. And it's a lot of people talk about a lot of Ian's songs are kind of not all, but maybe 75-80% are more of the sort of cold observer. Like a third party observing and describing without necessarily being emotionally involved in it.
Right.
Or maybe often there is emotion, but sometimes it's just an expression of the scene's emotion as opposed to him saying how he feels so much, which is interesting. And this is one of those songs where Jeffrey meets up with this girl in Leicester Square, and apparently she's the hint is that she's like got some feminist ideas that Jeffrey takes issue with in some form. Not that he's an anti-feminist or anything. I'm just saying that they have this encounter. Well, you got to read the words. And then he tells her, he goes, "You may be someone's, but you won't be mine." And I think it's very much tongue-in-cheek, though. And maybe it's not meant to be that biographical.
I think that's where Ian kind of draws from Zappa too, is
that observer,
and that humor.
Yeah, absolutely.
Kind of like that
sort of offbeat humor, which is kind of suits Monty Python and British humor,
right?
And it is kind of dry and a little tongue-in-cheek, and sometimes it's downright boyish. Some of the humor stuff. It's
right.
It's not childish, but teenagers, juvenile in some ways.
Correct. Yes.
Which usually, goes along with the subject matter, I would think. Instrumental pieces, BARRE, which of course was written by Bach originally.
Right, which is still, I think, a standard in the Tull live sets to this day, I would imagine.
It often is, yeah. I mean, I think I've seen 1 or 2 tours where he didn't do BARRE, but later on, BARRE became very prominent in a lot of the shows. Even though it does tend to become one of those songs that maybe you've heard once or twice too many times. Myself, I don't listen to the radio that much, but I don't hear it on the radio that much. When you hear Tull radio, what do you hear?
Usually, like Teacher, Aqualung, that's a given.
Right.
Locomotive Breath.
It's been a while since they played
Bungle in the Jungle. That's probably
Bungle in the Jungle. Yeah.
Most.
But those were the days when radio stations would really play a lot of stuff. Interesting thing about this, have you heard the story where Ian talks about how he was in that place, I think the same apartment that had the coin-operated heater?
I've never seen one of those. I'd be curious.
I know.
I'd have to look into one of those. Just
he went through some thin months, I guess, during those cold winter months. He was working at a movie theater, cleaning the place out. And matter of fact, Mick Abraham says one of the first times he ever saw Ian, he was walking down the street carrying a urinal which he had removed from the cinema he worked at for whatever reason. I don't know what he did with it. It's an interesting. Maybe if you know what Ian did with the urinal, if anything.
Well, if he was the maintenance guy at the
he may have had.
Yeah, maybe he was bringing it. Maybe he was replacing.
Maybe he was in the process of his paid job. Yes.
Right.
So BARRE, what I was saying was BARRE came about because his neighbor down below was a classical guitar student who was learning the classical song BARRE in, I believe, C minor.
So he joined in.
Dun, 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 dun. Yeah. So he heard this thing over and over and over being practiced and screwed up, probably. You know how a student is. You got to keep trying it, right?
Right. Yeah.
So eventually he kind of learned it just from hearing it, and then he came up with his own jazzy version of it. And my understanding is this was before he really knew much about Roland Kirk. I think Jeffrey Hammond came to him and said, there's a guy who plays flute a lot like you. And if you've never seen Roland Kirk, maybe we should do a little something on him sometime too. Because Roland Kirk is really fascinating. And the guy is incredibly talented. He is a saxophonist, a flutist, a multi-instrumentalist, a real genius. He's a real jazz blues guy. I would say the emphasis on jazz. And he plays, there's a sax that Ian plays called the Sapernino, I think. It's one of the really long, thin ones. Yeah, it almost looks like a clarinet or something. And he talks about how it's ridiculously difficult to keep. Roland Kirk, I've seen him in a couple of cuts where he does this one thing where he's actually playing like one or two instruments out of his mouth. He's got a flute or something here and a sax here. And then he's got a tube literally going from one of his nostrils to another instrument that he's playing by breathing through his nose. And it's like he's doing like what they call circular breathing, where he's breathing in and out at the same time.
Frampton ain't got nothing on that.
No, it's pretty cool. I mean, it is pretty cool, and it's pretty weird. And hopefully that tube is not shared, because this sticking this tube in his nose is a little weird watching that. But I'm telling you, you got to check this out. You got to check this guy out. He is really impressive. It's kind of cool that Ian sort of gravitated toward a similar approach that he uses. But he's not, I don't think he's really copying Kirk, because he started doing that before he heard of Kirk. Although obviously Kirk has been an influence. And of course, he says Serenade to a Cuckoo is the first song.
Well, it could be a balance of what he learned as a flute player and what he thought he could add to it. Making,
BARRE.
Yeah.
Great song, BARRE. I got to mention Glenn Cornick's work on BARRE too. I mean, the guy is just an extraordinarily good bass player. The bass solo he does on there, that's really good stuff.
Yeah,
whoever he's brought into the band, they've always brought their own thing with them. He's not quite like Frank Zappa, I think, where Frank would be very rigid.
Yeah, more regimented. Like, here's the music.
Right.
This is how you're going to play it.
This is the way you're going to. Yeah, exactly.
I think Frank gave some lenience, I think, though, to some of the guys.
Steve Vai, maybe.
Yeah, Scott Tunis, who was a bass player.
They had to prove themselves, of course, first, which I'm sure Ian would require. The thing I admire about him is his ability to do like everything. We see the beginnings of this now, and he's starting to take a little more control, production-wise. He's writing the tunes. He's kind of starting to call the shots a little bit, at least, anyway. And he's one of those people that can do everything. He's kind of like, I kind of look at him sometimes like the Da Vinci type person. He's somebody you can do. He can paint, he can draw and write. He's a good speaker. He's a good writer as far as lyrics go. He plays multiple instruments. He's got like a showmanship kind of ability to him. He's very comfortable being in the crowd, but he's not really a show off most of the time. He's very happy to be anonymous when he's not on stage, which I think is cool. A lot of people can't handle that. Maybe because they're so famous that they can't go anywhere without somebody recognizing them. It's possible. Probable, I'm sure. But he is one of those people that's lucky that he doesn't necessarily get mobbed where he goes somewhere. But he can play rock star when he wants to. But I remember a lot of interviews with him saying that he was never really interested in being a rock star as a traditional rock stars are thought of. He wanted to be a working musician that was earning a comfortable living, support his family, leave something for his
Right.
children, kind of thing. And I think maybe some of that came from their touring with Led Zeppelin early on, because he would talk about how they were exposed to a lot of stuff. Like Jimmy Page was always coming up to him, showing him snapshots of half-dressed women, and talking about all the crazy stuff.
They like partied on the road. Yeah,
very much so.
And Tull
were not like that at all.
It's kind of like with Rush when they toured with Kiss.
Yeah,
Gene Simmons couldn't figure out. Was these guys were like, guys from Rush were like sitting in a room reading books and stuff.
Yeah, and it's different people, and that's fine if they want to do that. Zepp is famous for tossing TVs out windows and all that kind of stuff. And of course, they paid for it. It doesn't necessarily make it right if it was your car they hit. But
right, yeah.
But anyway, I think that made an impression on Ian, and I'm pretty sure it was the same tour. It was either that tour or maybe the next one where they went to see Elvis. Ian tells the story of them going to see Elvis, and they had to do a show. I guess a couple of people in the band, they wanted to check out Elvis, and they were I think they're in California or somewhere out west.
Well,
they had the night off.
Him in person, or
no, to go see a show.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So they had tickets to a show. They went to see him, and because they had the night off. And some guy from backstage, some Elvis handler, came out and said, Elvis will see you now. And he was like, oh, well, that's cool, but we got a show tomorrow, so we really want to get into bed early. We don't really have time to hang out. But tell him thanks for having us, and we enjoyed the show, blah, blah, blah. That kind of stuff. And the guy was like, huh?
He snubbed the king?
Yeah. And the guy goes, no. You don't understand. Elvis will see you now. And he's like, well, again, thank you, but we are not going to be seeing Elvis tonight. And the guy is like, they couldn't understand. Are you not hearing us?
Yeah,
But what he said was that was not a good night for Elvis. He was a little messed up, maybe drunk or whatever. And, he didn't want to meet him like that. I can understand that. Interesting story, though. Anyway, next song. Track 4, Back to the Family. Back to the Family.
Good one. This is another one where Ian's voice doesn't sound like Ian yet.
Yeah, I would say, he's got a little bit of that. There's some youthfulness certainly in his voice until, I don't know, even up to Minstrel the Gallery. A song on Benefit, With You There to Help Me. It's kind of the same thing, I'm away from home, going back to the family. But I noticed that he talks about these kind of themes a lot. Like later on, he talks about the importance of coming and going, like going out to the Isle of Skye, spending time there, going back home. He says he sort of recharges himself by going to and fro, not necessarily by being in one place or the other. Interesting. But this is the same kind of song, where it talks about he's tired of all this stuff. Nobody's ever bothered him, not giving him free time. Goes back to the family. Sister's sitting there, thinks her hair looks funny. Nothing to do. And so he says,
basically, kind of like the rigors of record, go out to the road.
Right. And he says, I didn't get nothing for free.
Come home for a little bit and then back out on the road. Yeah.
So then in the end of the song, he goes back to town where there's something going on. And then when he gets back to town, he says, what the hell was I thinking? The phone keeps ringing all day long. Got no time for thinking. Every day it's the same old way. They're giving me too much to do. That sounds good. This is very much a jam song, I think, too, Maybe not so tight as songs like Nothing Is Easy. By just virtue of the way it goes, It's that kind of song. Yeah. I don't know a lot to say about it, but I think it's a fun song.
Earthy kind of.
Yeah, it is a little bit of that. Yeah, it's got almost... it's almost got a pre-prog or a pre-psychedelic feeling to it, a little bit maybe.
Yeah.
I have trouble defining that. If somebody says, "What do you mean by that?" Well, I'm not sure. It just does. Darn it. Okay, the next song, track number 5. We're still on side 1 for those of you who advise me. Look Into the Sun. This is another one of those first acoustic pieces. Interesting tidbit about this. I read on the wiki that. Andy Johns, who was the guy in the studio, their engineer, he actually plays bass on this song because Glenn Cornick wasn't around that day. And apparently it was a fretless bass. You have to kind of listen to it. If you listen to the Steven Wilson remix particularly, you can't hear, a better quality of the bass. This is also, I think, this is the first song that Martin plays wah wah on. Correct me if I'm wrong, somebody. But this is the first song where it's noticeable. And it's not real noticeable, I mean, because it's near the end of the song. And he plays it quietly, but he's going to be playing. I like wah wah though,
I do too.
I think a lot of people have
some
this
control,
Oh, some control would be nice. But there's a lot of people out there just, oh, this is so 60s, this is so 80s. Well, that's when it was made. I was born in the 60s. So there. But, I don't remember much from it, really. I remember when the astronauts landed on the moon, I wasn't too impressed. Because I'd seen that on cartoons all the time. It's a big deal.
You're probably watching Gigantor.
Yeah, great stuff, right? Gigantor, Japanimation. And Speed Racer, too. I love Gigantor. I'm surprised you know about Gigantor. So anyway, this is a good song, Look Into the Sun. It sounds... It's got a little bluesiness to it, but it's already, you can see they're moving away from the standard bluesiness. It's not so much a lost woman one as just a relationship that didn't make it kind of thing.
Yeah, they're putting like they're more of a spin, their own spin on the
and it's got a little bit
subject matter.
Yeah, and it's got some poetry to it, where that's kind of not so evident in the early bluesy stuff, and that's not surprising either. So I mean, not much to say about this song. It's a good song though. I like the wah wah at the end. Oh, I also
for
like
the
vinyl
folks. It's kind of closes out side one.
It certainly does. I forgot to mention the vocals though. The vocals where he has that sort of vibrato on his voice.
Right.
Like maybe it's going through a guitar amp or something. I'm not sure how they did it. There's different ways you can do it with a vibrato, but it sounds really cool. It's got that to it. And it's
singing through a Leslie, maybe.
Maybe that's what it is. Yeah, I'm not sure. But it's cool.
We have to,
it's different, and it's not. I wouldn't say it's
further
super subtle.
investigation.
I wouldn't say it's super subtle, but it's not like a flanger for you. Those of you who know what a flanger or a phaser is. Typical phaser where it's really bending and twisting it. So anyway, if you are on vinyl, this is the point where you want to flip your vinyl over. That sounds a little suspect, doesn't it? Flip your vinyl over. First track on side one is one of my favorites, and also until very recently was a concert favorite. Which, if you haven't seen this song live, Nothing Is Easy, you have not seen this song. I'm telling you. Although it sounds very live the way they do it,
right.
Fake out endings a couple times and going faster. Boom, 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 boom. This is one of those songs where timing is just critical. Obviously, somebody out there saying every song is time. But this one you notice it. What are your thoughts on this song?
Great track.
Do you
highlight track of the album?
I would say so too. This is definitely one of my favorite songs of the album. Although obviously I like them all.
It's got the just once again
the
bass and the drums, just so much groove on it.
Yeah, that is really the bass. The bass really drives this song in a lot of ways.
Right.
And the drums too.
They
really
work
powerful.
well as hell of a rhythm section.
And that leaves Martin to kind of ride out in front.
Right.
And then you got the flute on the other side also.
They got that foundation.
Yeah, it's what people say. It's got a lot of dynamics to it. It's very powerful. Right. It's very precise in the timing, and it's very aggressive. But it's not an aggressive lyric at all. It's really a great little bit of what would you say? Good advice. Nothing is easy.
Yeah.
Your fingers may freeze. Worst things happen at sea. There's good times to be had. So if you're alone and you're down to the bone, just give us a play. You'll smile in a while, then I'll get you happy my way. That's how the song goes. It's pretty cool. And it is aggressive, but it's really only delivered aggressively, performed aggressively. But it really is a good exercise.
Side two,
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great way to start side two. And it's a great exercise, demonstration in a heavy-hitting song, powerful drums, driving bass line, guitar that really isn't going with the bass. But it has the groove, and the timing, it doesn't suffer. And really, if you've ever seen a cover band do a version of this song, you know exactly what I mean. I mean, if you've ever seen a cover band do a not so great version of any song, but you know well, you know what I mean. It doesn't sound good. Some songs still sound okay if the timing's off a little bit, but a tight song like this has to be performed that way. When they used to do it live, holy cow! I mean, they would just shine, you know. Boom, 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 boom.
Yeah, well, at this
boom,
point
boom.
too, you know,
Powerful.
they're a well-oiled machine.
That
You know?
certainly is true, yeah. But you
The
know,
Mighty Martin at the helm of the guitar.
but that's because they're not all drunk and messed up and stuff.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
maybe they had a beer before they went on stage. I know John Evans used to like to have a beer at some point on
Yeah,
stage.
they weren't junkies.
No, they weren't junkies, and they really, I think they cared about their performance. You know,
Yeah.
it wasn't just like, oh, I'm getting paid, I don't give a crap. No,
Right,
they wanted
weren't
to do a
dialing
good
it in.
show.
Yeah. You were going to get the best Tull show that you could possibly get that night. There was nothing left on the table.
It's honest, you know.
Right,
There's an
yeah.
honesty to that kind of stuff, and you get that from Floyd too. Even though Floyd did lots of studio trick things,
Even
Led
in the
Zeppelin.
early days of even going into the middle genre, like Twisted Sister. You know, same with those guys.
Yeah.
They gave you whatever was in the tank. You know, by the time they go off stage, the tank was empty.
and that is, I think that's a hallmark of a lot of those early bands because they weren't studio bands. Bands like
Right.
the Who and the Stones and Tull and even Fairport Convention, which is more folk rock, of course. We'll talk about Fairport Convention. They were not studio bands. For the most part, they grew up playing together, practicing together. They knew each other. They got along okay.
Neighborhood guys.
Yeah, they were neighborhood school chums.
Right.
Maybe they weren't always best friends, but they knew how to get along with each other, especially on stage. Tull was famous in the 70s for various little personality issues between John Evans and Ian, I think, and a couple others. But you didn't see that when they were on stage.
But
And that was,
the
you know,
truck.
that was one of the things that was so cool about them is that professionalism, you know, and still is in many ways, which we'll talk about more. Okay, so we'll leave Nothing Is Easy behind, and we're still on the same vinyl side for those of you that are keeping track. The whole idea with listening to records in the old days was that you would flip the record over, put the needle down, and then go, you know, sit down or something. Nowadays, people just push, click, 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 one song at a time. But back then, that was the whole idea behind album-oriented rock.
Pull out your phone.
It was meant to, be listened to in, you know, a sitting. Obviously, not everybody always listened to the whole thing through.
Do you think it
all the time.
had the track lineup? Do you think they had that in mind?
Oh,
when
absolutely.
They were putting the tracks together.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm very sure of it. Especially, and you can tell the difference too sometimes when you look at a CD with only got one side on it.
Yeah.
You know, and I think they think differently about it now. Of course, the whole genre, the whole way of listening to music and choosing it has changed now anyway. So maybe it doesn't matter so much. But back then, yeah, the first song,
Vinyl's making a comeback.
the first song, yeah, it absolutely is. The first song on the beginning and end of each side, I think, was thought out carefully. You know, what would go where. Partly because they needed to balance things on a record or a cassette, obviously, or 8-track. I had a couple of cool 8-tracks. Remember them? They used to get melted.
That was to me the worst format
It was
ever for music.
And I used to have a 4-track, a quad War Child 8-track, which sounded really funny in an 8-track player.
Your Dodson?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes.
And I used to have a whole pile of them, as you probably remember, on my dashboard. And in the height of summer, occasionally heavy horses or stand-up would get melted beyond playability.
Right. Yeah.
That was unfortunate.
Sad days.
They were sad
days.
They were indeed sad days. Again, one of those acoustic ones. And Fat Man, of course, has always been more popular probably than Jeffrey Goes to Leicester Square. Although they've sort of been bringing it back lately somewhat. Fat Man is a really cool tune that has some interesting stuff going on. With a mandolin and tablas, I think, are in there. Yeah, it's got to be tablas. I thought they were bongos forever.
Sounds like tablas.
I think it is. I think it is. What else can we say about Fat Man? There's of course, common story that Fat Man was sort of poking fun at Mick Abraham. Ian sort of didn't necessarily write it, about Mick Abrahams, but he teasingly led him to believe that it was written about him.
Okay.
Which is funny because there's a couple lines in Fat Man that I've heard Ian say in interviews, Mick used to say. Like, Mick used to complain to Ian that Mick was a little bit fatter than Ian, and Ian always got the girl. You know, he never won the girl. There's a line in Fat Man where Ian says, roll us both down a hill, and I'm sure the Fat Man would win. So in other words, you know, that's a little dig, a little tease, a little
Yeah, I
jab.
don't know. I thought it was more kind of like a poke at the haves.
I think it could be.
And,
I think it could be.
You know, and how they're, you know, the relation between the haves and the
I
have-nots.
think it could be, but I think it was probably inspired by Mick a little bit. There's a couple of things.
I don't know.
There's a couple of things that sound like he's talking about him, but probably Ian is not really known for being too personal, especially these jabbing and something. So I think it's more that there was little bits in there that were sort of inspired by Mick, but it's really more about somebody else or something else.
Like
But he was just having a little fun with Mick when he
gesture.
made him think it was about him,
Yeah.
which is, you know, I suppose kind of
Messing with him.
Yeah, he was messing with him a little bit. Like when he said he bought the mandolin mostly to annoy Mick with on the ferry trip back from
Well, I mean, that's
Riverwood.
what led to the departure after the first album.
Could be. Could be. Okay, so Fat Man, good song though.
Yeah, great. One of my favorite songs.
And it's a good live tune, which they often extend a little bit. If you're a fan of the 80s stuff, you can see Dave Pegg doing a really cool bass solo in the middle of Fat Man. And he really shows off what he can do. If you've only seen Dave Pegg with Fairport Convention, you have not seen Dave Pegg play, because he's getting older now, but he had some pretty nimble fingers. He was really impressive.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely one of my favorite Tull bass players for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Very well-rounded musician too.
Right, another guy
He can play
mandolin,
play guitar, he can play
right?
mandolin, yeah, and he's got that kind of humor too that really fits in with the band.
Right. Yeah.
Unfortunately, Fairport, doesn't have that kind of financial backing that a lot of other bands have, which is one of the reasons why
we
I
don't see him in the States that often.
Yeah,
Right?
of course they are getting older and stuff.
Yeah.
But if you don't know Fairport, I recommend Fairport. They're not. If you only think you know what they sound like, you probably haven't really heard them.
They're not your daddy's folk band.
Yeah, they're very interesting, and their connection with Tull is very interesting too.
And they also have a Zeppelin connection. With,
and they also with John Bonham and Sandy Denny,
who sings the vocal on Battle of Evermore.
I was going to say John Bonham, I think, was in a band with Dave Pegg for a while.
Oh.
It was the Ian Campbell
group
or something.
All right.
Yeah,
further research on that.
Yeah. But Sandy
here
Denny,
in the library,
certainly.
we can maybe see that. Find that
somewhere in the library behind us. Going on from Fat Man, we get to probably what is my favorite song on the album. My two favorite songs, I'd have to say, are probably We Used to Know and Nothing Is Easy. And now we're on to We Used to Know. This is, of course, the song that has that eerily similar chord sequence to Hotel California by the Eagles. And, of course, the funny thing is, yeah, it's true. The chord sequence for this song is the same as Hotel California. The melody is different, somewhat. The timing is different. The key is different. But it's the same chord sequence. And it was some years ago, Martin Barre pointed that out to Ian Anderson. And what makes it interesting is, in 1970, when they were on the benefit tour, the Eagles were their warm-up band. And they would have been playing We Used to Know live on tour in 1970. So, some people were like, well, so-and-so... Don Henley was the guy who wrote it, but he didn't join the Eagles till after that point, supposedly. So there's a lot of give and take. My own feeling on it is that I'm sure they didn't rip it off.
Do further research.
We may have to do some research into it. My own thought is, that I've done a little research, is that it is really similar, and there's a dude that does a mashup. Maybe we'll play the mashup where somebody takes the words to and the flute to We Used to Know and plays it at the same speed as Hotel California, and it sounds really eerily
Are we
similar.
delving into the rabbit hole of conspiracy theories?
Probably, yeah. We're not going to spend much time on it, but we'll check it out, maybe. But that's my opinion. It's probably maybe it was inspired. It's not the most complicated chord progression, but it is kind of an odd progression that somebody only like Ian would come up with.
I just never made the connection between the Eagles and Tull. Never would have thought.
Yeah, it's
And they toured together?
yeah. Imagine that the Eagles
Wow.
in 1970 opened up for Tull during their American tour.
Yeah, well,
they've had Otter.
maybe not as been as well known.
No, well, yeah, they were very new. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
So We Used to Know, good song. It's about the old days, like a couple of years before when they were poor and didn't know if they were going to make it.
Weren't sure if they had enough money for the heater.
Yeah. There's a lot of emotion in this song, if you ask me. There's emotion and there's, there's like memory, obviously, but it's not so much the way he sings it. I think is, the guitar solo, the wah solo on the guitar. I think is masterful on this. So I really like it. I really like it, and especially the outro, man. It is just well done.
The band on the
And it really
whole
flows.
album really brings it. Now you have different guitar player, and Martin's more aggressive.
Martin, yeah, definitely.
More of a powerful, more aggressive, guitar player.
I wonder, Martin doesn't say too much about early influences, and I wonder if he was influenced by early summarized. I mean, if you read the lyrics, saying the thing too about the battle days we used to know, slowly upstairs, faster down, you're getting older maybe, to revisit stony grounds. It almost sounds like, like the grave, getting older, thinking about, will we accomplish what we want to, that kind of thing. And then you can hear it even in the music when he says that those bad times came and went and gave way to fruitful years. And then that flute solo comes in and the whole thing just kind of lifts up and has a little bit more of it's more of a bittersweet feeling now. Like, we had some rough times, but now that's a memory. It's like a bittersweet memory because things are better. And then when that guitar solo, that outro comes in, oh man, I think that is just perfect. I really enjoy that a lot. If you haven't heard that, if you're not a big fan of the early Tull stuff, or maybe you've heard what this was, and you're like, well, I don't want to listen to stand-up. Night and day difference. It really is in many ways.
Yeah.
You would, if you're interested in that, you would probably enjoy at least some of the tunes on stand-up. And We Used to Know. I recommend anyone check it out who wants a good example of what I would call maybe a pre-progressive rock song from the very late 60s, early 70s, It's got some of those elements that will show up in the sort of, not so much in the note choices maybe, but in the way the song is arranged. It takes its time and it kind of flows. It has a good movement to it. And it's a very well-constructed song. And I think that might be one of the best examples on this album of the kind of songwriting Ian was going to come out with in the future. So next, number 4, still on side 2, a few vinyl people got confused there. Reasons for Waiting. Now, this is the song that I'm pretty sure David Palmer arranged some strings for. And Reasons for Waiting is one of 2 tracks on this album that Martin Barre also plays flute on. Not everybody knows that. Martin plays flute with Ian on BARRE and on this song. And that's probably another reason Ian enjoyed working with him, because he was, much more well-rounded.
Musical. Wasn't just a one-trick pony.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And this is a good song, and this is, I think Ian has said that this is not really, Reasons for Waiting is really not a personal song, even though it sounds like it. It's more of one of those sort of fictional biographical songs, where he takes images from things he sees, tries to come up with something. I think in some of these songs he's still working on what you might call a fairly elementary thematic stuff. The songs are about fairly simple things.
Pre-concept error.
Yeah, they're about fairly simple things. This album was recorded at Morgan Studios. And except for BARRE, which they recorded at Olympic Studios. It's because Morgan was booked. Interesting thing is, the tape that's on stand-up of BARRE is the one from Olympic Studios, I'm pretty sure. The one from Morgan, which is on the 50th anniversary, is take 1. So one of the things people say is that, starting with this album, Ian didn't really play any acoustic guitar, and this was. Although he plays a little piano on the last song round. Which we completely forgot to talk about.
Yeah.
It's a short song.
But you're hearing more him now playing acoustic.
Exactly. And not only that, he's doing it on songs like We Used to Know, where the band is with him too.
Right.
So this is maybe one of the
playing
first
along
songs
with the band.
Right. This is one of the first songs where he's playing acoustic rhythm. Yeah. And he's writing songs. He's writing songs that are primarily that aren't really just an acoustic guitar as opposed to a rhythm electric guitar in the background. You know, for a different sound.
Yeah.
Which a lot of Tull songs do have, and I think is kind of part of their signature sound. The acoustic rhythm guitar with an electric guitar out front. You know, this album to benefit to Aqualung. You know, and then finally it sort of gets to a point like at Minstrel in the Gallery and Songs from the Wood, where he comes across as a master of the acoustic. Maybe not in the same way that some other people like Steve Howe or Roy Harper even, but I think there's a lot of Roy Harper influence as far as
I would say Ian's acoustic is more folk based, even though it's not folk music. More earthier feel than say like Steve Howe is more classical.
Exactly. Yeah.
That is like
nothing against Yes, but it almost sounds like a lot of their influences are like easier to spot.
Right.
It's not a criticism. It probably, well, maybe it is. It kind of sounds like one, but it's just the way they do things. I mean, that's part of what makes a band a band.
Right.
All the people working together.
Yes.
Exactly. But with Tull, I think it's a little harder to spot those influences because I don't think they're purposely masked, but they're just mixed in a way where they don't dovetail. They don't show their connection points so easily. They blend better. Kind of like a stew that's been stirred up really good.
Right, yeah.
You know what I mean? And I think that's partly Ian's production ability. It's partly the people they had in the studio. And partly the influence of David Palmer, especially later on in the 70s, where his influence grew. And, he had a big hand in adding little bits to songs that really, really added to them, especially when you get up to Songs from the Wood, where his string synthesizer work is really awesome. But anyway, getting back to this, one of the things that remember the American critic Robert Christgau. I'm probably murdering his name. I almost said hopefully he's dead now, so he won't care. But I don't mean to say hopefully he's dead. I'm sorry. I hope that he is doing well. But
God, let us know.
Let me see if I can stick my foot a little further down my throat. So anyway, he reiterated his dislike of the band during his review of Stand Up. However, he did say that he thought it was better.
Better than the first one?
Better than the first one.
Okay. All right.
Which,
Yeah, okay, so he's at least admitting to some progression, right?
Even Rolling Stone gave it a basically favorable review. And if any criticism they came out with, they said, it has a fairly launch quotient. But it is quite marvelous nonetheless. It's not really funky, but rather meticulously crafted, which deserves careful listening. That's about the most honest review I think Rolling Stone ever gave Tull, for the most part.
Give anybody.
Maybe, after Aqualung, they would just hated Tull for the most part. Actually, maybe with Aqualung, too. Yeah. Oh, Ian's preaching to us again. Anyway, so much for reasons for waiting. The final tune, except for the singles, for 1,000 Mothers. This is a cool tune, and I like it a lot. It's almost like a party tune for them, like a kind of bang it out tune. It's not my favorite though. I think I like Back to the Family and especially We Used to Know better because this one is maybe a little too chaotic. Although the drumming and stuff on here really does remind you of stuff that's coming later.
Right.
in some places.
But it does a good job of closing out the album.
Oh, I think so. Yeah, it closes
May
out
not
on a
be
good
a highlight
energy.
track, but you know, it's a pretty good.
Some people might have said, "Well, why don't you have Reasons for Waiting as a closeout?" Well, maybe a little too low energy.
Right.
For 1,000 Mothers also has that extra outro. You know, I'm referring to the last 30 seconds where they ding 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 come back in, and you could almost say it's like a bonus track. You know, because if you're really in a hurry, you may miss it the first time you're listening
on the
to
CD prior to that ever existing.
I think probably there's more than one person who, for whatever reason, picked it up at the end, or they heard it on the radio without the outro, and then one day when they were busy, they didn't pick it up,
and they just let the record
you're like,
finish
what the
out.
heck? You know, this is kind of a funny thing. But this is a good song, and it's in a lot of ways it's kind of personal for Ian, although he says it's not. The anger in it was really not how he felt toward his parents, but this song is obviously towards mothers and fathers who warned their children not to go off and become rock stars.
Right.
Which is not necessarily bad advice, but there's a lot of lines in there where he says, "Did it surprise you to be picked up at 8 in a limousine, doing the things he's accustomed to do, which at one time seemed like a dream, now it's true," something along those lines. I don't know exactly. So that's about what it is. But he's talking, it's like he's talking to his parents saying, and in the end, a dig, like a backhanded compliment says, "And knowing you made it all happen." Like he's as much as saying, at least to some respect, that if you hadn't drove me to leave home, this would never have happened. I'd be working at the library. I'd be a policeman or something.
Blessing in disguise.
Which is interesting. Yeah, because he's obviously happy that he made it, and that he's not resigned to being a policeman. But
we're working in the middle.
You know, I think this whole album is about, you know, nothing is so easy. What else can we say quickly? A couple other songs that come along at this time: "Living in the Past," "Driving Song," "Sweet Dream," "17," all singers. "Living in the Past," of course, was recorded, I think, when they were in the middle of their stand-up tour at America. That's when they were supporting Led Zeppelin. They went to, I think it was a studio in New York or Long Island or somewhere where they recorded "Living in the Past," and I think "Driving Song." To "Sweet Dreams," one of the first songs Ian played a 12-string guitar on. He doesn't often play 12-string, even on the acoustic stuff. Although I don't think he makes a big. I think it depends on the mood he's in. Maybe he doesn't like to brag, because if he plays a lot of instruments, he usually just says guitars. And there could be, I think there's at least one spot on the new album that sounds an awful lot like Bouzouki to me.
Okay.
But it just says guitars on there. So we'll talk about that when the time comes. So anyway, I think that'll wrap up this album. We spent too much time talking about some stuff and not enough on another.
Right.
It's our little show and tell at the end.
This
Stand Up.
The original Stand Up, which when you open up, bifold.
All right.
It's just like those pop-up books when you were a kid.
Let me bring it in closer. Unfortunately, there's a little glare.
There's the boys.
There are the boys.
Standing up.
Standing up.
Should have called. Maybe they should have called it pop-up.
All right,
or something.
So thanks for tuning in for episode number 2, Stand Up, the great Tull album.
We'll have to fix the ceiling for the next episode.
Yeah, we'll take that. So next album is going to be Benefit. And look for some bonus episodes. I think we're going to do a bonus episode. Talk a little bit about Wild Turkey, a little bit about Wobbling Pig, the Mick Abraham solo stuff. And we'll listen to maybe 1 or 2 tracks of Ian playing with Mick Abraham on his blues CD. So thanks for listening and watching from me and Mike, and from Mike and Mike. Do we have a catchphrase we use? Not really.
I'm sure we'll figure it out.
We'll work on that. All right. Until next time, stay tuned for Benefit.
Like and subscribe.